Chapter 10. Henry was floating in bliss over his conquering of acceptance, gratitude, and rejoicing. He saw how acting as a mirror cured his desire to be understood. He saw how realizing his impermanence cured his desire for a fixed identity. He saw how all his actions rippled out into the universe, which cured his desire for recognition. He wondered what deficiencies about him needed cure next. He thought about William and how he always trusted that there existed truth somehow. Henry thought about himself, how he never trusted in anyone or anything. He always had some doubt which he could not seem to let go of. He never let his ideas run wild, as it seemed that there was no meaning in building on false claims. And as he never had faith in the truth of any claim, he did not seem to get as far in his considerations as William did. In an instant, what Henry had built and cured seemed to slip back into ignorance, since he knew he did not have faith in the arguments he had given. Staggering questions started to arise in his mind. How he could trust his own authenticity as a mirror. How he could trust that he actually could change his identity if he wanted to, even if it felt like he could. How he could trust that others felt the same as him when confronted with charged actions which he would propagate further. However, he certainly felt something when he presented himself with the arguments. It was like he felt alive and bursting with life, as the arguments were so affirming. He thought about it some more and found that the authenticity did not lie in the mirror. It lied in himself, as the reflection was merely of himself. And therefore, since he could make him feel at peace by merely reflecting his own desires, he would naturally have some kind of legitimacy, which was the kind of thing he wanted with his desires in the first place. He grounded himself in the mirror analogy. He acknowledged that the mirror itself did not change, but how could he be certain that the reflections of himself changed? Well, naturally, he observed that he went from chaos to peace by mirroring his desires, so clearly his inner psychological world did change. The only thing that remained constant within I.M. was his awareness surrounding the change. It was as his awareness represented the unchanging mirror that reflected his experience back to him. It seemed to him that he was more the mirror than what it reflected, since what reflected was always in flux. In that way, he could conclude that given everyone else was aware they also had the mirror quality to them, and therefore charged actions reflected back into their consciousness, and the reflection would necessarily be charged the same way as the outside action which brought about it. So he concluded that other people had the same experience of charged actions as he did. What he sent outward was what he set into the mirrors of others, and what they send outward inevitably shines back into his mirror. With this in mind, Henry could see how in essence awareness was present in everything. He began to feel connected with everything as if he was part of everything and everything was part of him. He realized that there was nothing to have faith in outside of himself. He could trust in his own awareness since it was so close to him, and thereby extended this trust out to the whole universe. He was finally participating in existence instead of running away like he often had done. His unification with the universe made it non-alien, as everywhere suddenly felt like home to him. Through faith in himself, he learned to appreciate the changing nature of everything, just as he had come to accept change within himself. His faith did not paralyze him, since he realized that his thoughts and actions were out of his control, as his body was just a wave in a large ocean. He just had to flow down the current and seek refuge in the fact that his essence was non-changing. He felt liberated from fear and doubt for the same reason. He no longer needed to hold on to specific outcomes, as his pure essence was not in control. He surrendered his need for control to the higher power that controlled everything. He had realized that he was not in control of everything that happened in his body. He found that he was only in control of his attachment to what happened, and with that, he let go of every expectation he had of what he experienced. Before, he believed that he deserved certain treatment from the universe, but now he saw that the universe did not owe him anything, nor did he owe it anything. Every moment was a gift, not a transaction. When he stopped measuring what he received against what he thought he deserved, the need for special treatment dissolved. He realized that everything that happened was already part of the same flow his body belonged to. There was no outside force rewarding or punishing him. There was only the neutral, reflective process of existence. It was just the unfolding of life as mirrored by pure awareness. Once he saw this, he no longer felt the need to demand fairness or favor from it. He felt secure in the unfolding of his experiences within the universe, for everything felt familiar to him. Nothing was truly new, yet he cherished every moment as a gift. Though the world seemed familiar, he remained deeply aware of each passing thought. He no longer smudged the mirror of his awareness with past conditioning, but instead used the wisdom of the mirror itself to recognize the same essence in all things. The same awareness that looked out through his own eyes was also shining through every movement of the world. Henry had realized that what he called himself was not separate from that awareness, and therefore nothing in the universe was truly foreign. He thought about his revelation that had led him to figure out what he really had control over. It seemed so clear to him that his attachment was under his control, not as control in what he was attached to, but as control of the attachment he had which he could let go of. He wondered if he could apply this finding to other aspects of his life. He thought about how people had treated him poorly through his life. He witnessed his bitterness arise when thinking about them. But as he remembered that they were part of the same awareness that made he who he was, he saw that they shared the same control over their attachments, which gave them opportunity to change for the better. He saw how letting go of attachments would stop ego-driven actions, and thereby the people he had deemed evil and selfish had it in them to become good. He thought that the key to forgiveness was to acknowledge the potential the universe had for change. He thought how foolish it was of him to have rigid images of other people, since he knew how capable himself was of change. There should be no exception in other people for the capability to change. Before he held grudges, but now he released them by forgiving everything in a way that he acknowledged the capacity for change in everything without having any expectations for genuine change. This realization released a great deal of trauma in his mind as he totally let go of his grudges towards the world. He thought about how often he put pressure on others to change, and he wanted others to change so he would not be hurt. He realized that he was still caught in the same illusion that caused their pain in the first place, the belief that safety came from controlling others' behavior. But the truth was, no amount of control could make the world safe. People's suffering and the actions that arose from it were part of their own unfolding. He could force awakening on them without creating new suffering in himself. He saw that much of his need to control others came from the wish to be free from their cruelty. He had wanted them to change so they would stop hurting him, but now he understood that no one could be forced into awareness. Each person had to awaken through their own pain, just as he had through his. Trying to save them from their suffering had only bound him to it. So instead of demanding that would they change, he released them to their own becoming. He saw that his peace did not depend on their actions, but on his ability to remain free of the need to control them. In that release, the power others once held over him disappeared, and his compassion deepened as an understanding of the whole movement of suffering. He came to understand that his fear of powerlessness had never been cured by control, but only concealed by it. All his efforts to dominate others, to appear strong, or to force certainty upon the world had only deepened his dependence on this illusion. It was only when he stopped fighting to be in control that he discovered real strength. By bringing mindful attention to the fear itself, he saw that it was simply a plea for safety from a wounded part of himself. As he met that fear with awareness instead of suppression, it dissolved into a quiet understanding. He did not need to control life to be safe, and he alone decided how much he was attached to his experiences, even if they were negatively charged. He came to understand that since forgiveness did not hold any obligations other than acknowledging free will, he was free to discontinue any relationships with people that were only looking to bring him down. Even though they had not realized their true nature yet, he acknowledged that they had the capacity to change. It was not that he held resentment against anyone, since no one could hurt him. He was just no longer interested in destructive energy near him. He no longer resonated with ignorance and no longer tried with effort to change anyone's perspective. He found peace in the fact that he did not need to save anyone, as they were in control of their own life and had the capacity themselves to realize their true nature. Henry's mind wandered to a traumatizing childhood memory. He was on a trip with his family and he wanted to go see the water. They lived on a cliff and the ocean was located at the bottom of the cliff. He ran towards the edge of the cliff and saw the waves of the ocean. There was a rainstorm rumbling, then something snapped in him. Instead of staying a distance from the edge, He intentionally walked closer to the precipice to feel the raw power of nature. He was driven by a desire to confront his fear of heights and to connect with something beyond himself. The wind was howling, the rain was lashing, and waves crashed violently against the rocks below. He stood on the edge, knowing a wrong step or gust of wind could send him plunging to his death, but he felt invincible in that moment, exhilarated by the adrenaline and his defiance of danger. He walked back from the edge into safety and survived an encounter with death that he escaped only by. Janzu. He contemplated his wild encounter with death. He understood how he had been fueled by impulsivity, a need for intensity, and the pursuit of a profound experience all his life. The memory haunted him. He understood how stupid it was of him to self-impose this trauma. It was something he had to live with. Just like how he felt he deserved his current situation, he felt he had deserved to die that day due to his irresponsible nature. His heart pounded and he felt a sense of hopelessness. He thought that all the remaining of his life after the incident had been unearned. He recollected all the times he had imposed trauma onto himself, when he started fights, when he asked someone out and got rejected, when he took drugs, when he wanted to win discussions, when he insulted others and they retaliated, when he hated himself. He thought about how he could ever forgive himself for imposing all this pain onto himself. He thought that he could not change what had happened since it was all in the past. He asked himself if the past pains defined him. Well, he could still feel the hurt, but he knew that he would definitely not do anything that irresponsible again. He had learned his lesson. He realized that all he needed to do to forgive himself was to move on and recognize that he always had the ability to change. Not that he could forget the traumatizing incidents, but he was not defined by the person who did those things in the past. A person that were once him, but that he was no longer attached to. He shook the memory out of his head and focused on the things to come. He did not die that day, and maybe that was an opportunity for him to live more meaningfully and purposefully going forward. He aligned himself with the power of non-attachment, in that he no longer identified by the careless, irresponsible, and thrill-seeking boy he once was. He did not immediately identify with the opposite as a disciplined, moderated man. Instead, he just let go of any expectations towards himself and simply let himself exist with no conflict. He found that if he were in a similar situation today, he would not let the excitement of danger control him into putting his life in danger. He was unmoved by any pressure he put on himself. He felt that by forgiving everything, including himself, he could see everything without any filter. He realized that to forgive everything was to understand everything, because forgiveness arose naturally from seeing things as they were, without distortion from judgment, attachment, or resistance. He saw lack of awareness as the root of all suffering. When he truly understood why someone suffered, why they acted destructively, why they lashed out or sought control, resentment became impossible. There was only clarity and compassion left. In that light, forgiveness was not an act of mercy, but a natural outcome of seeing things as they truly were. Awareness revealed the innocence within all actions, not as moral purity, but as the inevitability of cause and effect moving through unawakened minds. He saw fully that before awareness arose, beings acted according to their conditioning, their fears, their desires, and their ignorance. They could not have acted differently because they did not see differently. Awareness was what allowed genuine choice and transformation. Without it, all behavior was mechanical, reactive, and determined by past patterns. So as he understood everything, he saw that every hurtful act, including his own, was not freely chosen in malice, but flowed from a lack of awareness. From that recognition, forgiveness came naturally to him because blame no longer made sense. Ignorance, not deliberate evil, was the true cause of suffering. He thought again about his close encounter with death from his childhood. He realized that he was forcing himself to walk to that ledge, and it did not come naturally to him as he experienced a lot of resistance. He thought about the principle of least necessary effort and how it could have been applied to the situation he was in. He concluded that both mindfulness and least necessary effort shared qualities like precision, intentionality, and non-resistance. Both approaches sought to avoid overextension, favoring simplicity and clarity over forceful or impulsive action. They both emphasized conserving mental and physical energy by minimizing excess and maintaining a calm, focused presence. In the same way, he really had to work against all his instincts while walking towards the ledge, but his ego forced him towards it by creating a desire to conquer his fears. If he had applied the least necessary effort strategy, then he would have realized that walking towards the cliff was not necessary at all for his development. He created unnecessary misery because the action was fundamentally selfish and self-imposed, not mandated by a higher good. Henry could see how he reached his current state of forgiveness and transcendence of identification by accumulating enough unnecessary misery to reach a point of existential crisis. Without the memory of his own reckless capacity for self-harm, he may never have fully achieved the profound self-forgiveness and understanding of mechanical behavior, though he could see how he did not operate with that in mind when he exerted himself to the danger. His intentions was clearly wrong and egoistic in the moment of the incident. His suffering was not a reward for the act, but a tool created by the act that his soul later used for its own progression. He witnessed how the universe used the consequences of his wrong choices to lead his soul back to the good. He thought about how earlier he had wanted to take his own life, but now saw that the method of least necessary effort forbids such an action. He saw that in the framework of mindfulness and minimal effort, life's challenges, including intense suffering or distress, called for responses that conserved energy and sought resolutions aligned with natural processes, such as healing, adaptation, and acceptance. Suicide was a final action, closing off all possibilities for future adaptation, growth, or change. In contrast, mindfulness emphasized responding to challenges with flexibility, allowing for the situation to evolve and resolve with minimal exertion. From this perspective, the least necessary effort would be a mindful response that remained open to change, exploring less extreme, adaptive responses. He thought about how least necessary effort implied working in harmony with natural processes, including the body's inherent drive to sustain itself. Mindfulness encouraged a respect for life and awareness of impermanence, seeing challenges as phases that may shift and evolve without extreme measures. Thus, suicide represented a radical departure from this natural flow, rather than a minimal intervention. He saw how least necessary effort was about engaging with situations without excess struggle or resistance. By cultivating presence, he learned to experience suffering without attachment or aversion, and thereby conserving mental and emotional energy. In this way, he thought that suicide could be seen as contrary to energy conservation, as it involved a forceful break from life rather than a gentle acceptance or engagement with the challenges. He saw the fact that he valued impulsivity, and that was part of who he was. He acknowledged that it was a trait he had that could bring excitement and energy to his life, but he also had to acknowledge its potential for harm when not tempered with wisdom. This whole movement was part of being self-aware. He did not need to abandon impulsivity. He just had to make it work for him in a way that kept him safe and fulfilled. He thought that it might be helpful to establish personal boundaries for where impulsivity was acceptable and where it could be dangerous. For example, a boundary could be never engaging in physical risks without considering the potential consequences. With boundaries, he could enjoy the rush of spontaneity in ways that did not threaten his life. He thought that balancing his love for impulsivity with mindfulness might allow him to live fully without the burden of regretting actions that put him at great risk. Finding that balance could give him the freedom he craved while honoring his desire for safety and long-term well-being. He swore to prioritize mindfulness before acting impulsively. This did not mean taking a brief moment to check in with himself and asking, does this idea align with my long-term values, or could it harm me or others? He figured that this pause could be as quick as a breath, but it gave him a chance to reconsider his actions if necessary. He acknowledged that there was value in seeking out experiences, but there was also wisdom in recognizing when to step back and let life flow. A proactive nature, which was dear to him, showed courage, curiosity, and willingness to grow. In another light, he realized that this nature might lead to impatience with slower processes, potentially causing frustration or harmful impulses. In contrast, a passive nature often reflected traits such as acceptance, contentment, and patience, but it could also indicate a lack of initiative, reliance on others, or an aversion to change or risk. In some cases, passivity might show a desire for stability or a tendency to avoid conflict, though it could also be a result of fear, indifference, or uncertainty. It all depended on the context and his approach to life's challenges. He saw how in the past he had practiced a very proactive nature, but he needed to balance it with a passive nature. And in balancing, he would stand on a thin wire between the two extremes, not falling over to either side. He figured that balancing these two approaches could help him find peace and fulfillment without feeling the constant need to push boundaries, while he could be proactive in shaping his path. It was okay to trust that life would present opportunities for growth even without his direct intervention. He thought about how unexpected moments often carried the deepest lessons. By balancing action with trust, he might find a new sense of peace and fulfillment. The experience he had on the cliff, while powerful and life-altering, should be perceived a call for transformation rather than a defining moment of recklessness. The synthesis encouraged him to acknowledge the value of his impulsivity, but also to develop boundaries and mindfulness, allowing him to pursue excitement while minimizing unnecessary risk. This exploration provided a well-rounded perspective on how balancing proactive and passive elements in life could lead to a more fulfilling and purposeful existence. It underscores the idea that both qualities were essential, and that peace and fulfillment arose not from rejecting one in favor of the other, but from integrating the two in a thoughtful and reflective way. A truly balanced nature, one that harmonized proactive drive with mindful passivity, required full awareness and alertness in each moment. This balance was not passive or automatic. It demands the ongoing presence of awareness to discern when to act and when to yield. Awareness allowed one to recognize subtle internal cues, external circumstances, and shifting contexts, enabling wise, timely decisions rather than impulsive reactions or apathetic avoidance. Alertness sharpened the ability to perceive opportunities and risks without being overwhelmed by distraction or fear. In the balanced state, action was neither reckless nor hesitant, but grounded in a clear understanding of what was truly necessary and beneficial. Thus, cultivating balanced nature was a dynamic practice, an active vigilance that invites one to engage with life fully and responsively, rather than merely reacting or withdrawing. It seemed to Henry that wisdom was not merely the accumulation of knowledge, but the ability to apply that knowledge with balance and clarity. It arose when understanding was put into motion with discernment, when he knew not only what was right, but when and how to do it. True wisdom involved the strength to act without being driven by impulse, and the steadiness to refrain without being paralyzed by hesitation. It was the middle path between rashness and indecision, guided by inner clarity rather than fear or craving. In this way, wisdom became the bridge between awareness and action, allowing one to move through life with grace by responding, not reacting, engaging, not escaping. It was this kind of wisdom that sustained a balanced nature and allowed for both courage and restraint, spontaneity and foresight. Henry's journey culminated in a profound integration of his internal realizations, leading him to a state of being rooted in non-attachment, universal connection, and balanced action. He recognized that true forgiveness, both for himself and others, emerged from an understanding of suffering as a product of a lack of awareness, rather than malice. This perspective dissolved his grudges and freed him from the burden of expecting others to change, acknowledging their inherent capacity for transformation without imposing his will. He released the illusion of control, understanding that his peace depended not on external circumstances or the behavior of others, but on his own mastery over attachment. His childhood encounter with death, once a source of self-imposed trauma, transformed into a powerful catalyst for self-forgiveness and growth. He saw that past actions, however reckless, did not define his present self, and that his suffering had served as a tool for his soul's progression. This insight led him to embrace the principle of least necessary effort, realizing that life's challenges, even intense distress, called for adaptive, energy-conserving responses rather than extreme measures like suicide. Henry learned to honor his innate impulsivity, not by suppressing it, but by tempering it with mindfulness and established boundaries, allowing for spontaneity without self-harm. He recognized the value in balancing his proactive nature with a receptive passivity, understanding that true wisdom lay in discerning when to act and when to yield. This dynamic balance, sustained by unwavering awareness and alertness, allowed him to navigate life with grace, responding from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. In this integrated state, Henry discovered that wisdom was the living bridge between awareness and action, enabling him to move through existence with both courage and restraint, ultimately finding peace in the harmonious unfolding of himself within the boundless universe. All he had learned seemed so clear to him that there was no resistance in him left. It was like his whole mind cooperated with his soul and they worked in harmony. All he had needed was to explain to himself the true nature of reality, and that was what he had done. Starting with no realization of anything, he had managed to climb the ladder of revelation, which led him to a whole understanding of everything. He was prepared with truth and the power of non-attachment to evolve further and bring total peace to his mind and soul. Suddenly everything went black around Henry. He got startled and looked at his hands. They were shining with a bright light. He felt a force on his body like he was accelerating towards something. He looked around and saw a blue dot that was quickly getting larger. He thought that he would meet his doom as he hit it. After a while of accelerating, he finally hit the ground of the dot. He could barely feel the pain from the fall. He raised himself from the ground and looked around. The planet had greatly dimmed colors, but he could narrowly see buildings in the distance. He was sure that he had landed back on Earth, which confused him since he had seen it explode.